The Football Show on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, as obnoxiously passionate about soccer as Frank Lampard after the final whistle. Gamble responsibly. See dunlewy.net.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then. What about your start to the game?
It wasn't bad, was it?
Why should an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
Welcome along to the Football Show. Nathan with you this evening. It is an exciting time if you're a Leeds United supporter. You're back in the big time. They return to the Premier League this Saturday, and what a game to open up with. Anfield against the champions Liverpool, and I'm delighted that on tonight's show we're joined by a Leeds legend, and for once it is not John Giles. I'm delighted to be joined by the great Eddie Gray. Good evening, Eddie.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm well. How are you keeping?
Very good, thank you very much.
John Giles has been a regular feature on, Irish television for decades, but on this show in particular every Thursday night for 20 years. And, we do get a little bit nostalgic from time to time and talk about the good old days when John was a player. And you come up all the time, your greatness and just how much he respected you as a player. You're still pretty close. You had a lot of good times together. Yeah,
I still keep in touch with John, and the feeling's mutual with John. I joined the club in 1963. I first come down in 62 just to have a look at the place. I was very impressed with Don Revie, and that's why I signed for Leeds United instead of going to Glasgow Celtic. And John joined the club in 63 as well, came from Manchester United after he just won the FA Cup in Manchester United. And we had some great times together over the years. And the both of us were very fortunate though. We played under a great manager, but we played with some great players as well, truly great players.
That must have been a huge decision for you at a young age. I guess you're only 14, 15 at the time. You're Glasgow born and bred. Like Celtic are the big dogs at the time. They go on and they're on the verge of becoming European champions. To turn your back on that and to choose Leeds, that's the power of Don Revie right there.
Well, it was solely down to Don that I decided to come to the club. I must be honest and say though, the scout in Glasgow that first asked me to go down, a chap called John Barr, he ended up becoming chief scout with Leeds United, and he signed lots of terrific players for the club. You know, my brother Frank joined later on, and Joe Jordan and Gordon McQueen and, players like that. So John was a big influence as well because he was such a nice man. But obviously Don impressed me the most. I mean, I'd been to a few clubs, and when you go to football clubs, and you're a young kid, and I travelled down for Glasgow Central Station in Leeds, it's usually somebody like the chief scout that meets you or, somebody else for the club. But when I come down from Glasgow, Don met me himself and took me up to the hotel I was staying at and took me to my digs, and I got to the training ground the next day and I was with all the rest of the boys. It was Christmas 1962, and, I was waiting with the rest of the trialists to go out and have a kick around in a game, and Don came in and pulled me out for the crowd and told me I was training with him as a 14-year-old with the first team.
Wow.
So that was a good experience as well.
I can't imagine Don Revie gave that treatment to everybody. You're 14 years of age. He must have known at that stage you were something special.
I come down with, what you would call a big schoolboy reputation. But it doesn't stand you in any stead when you actually get in with professional players. You soon realise you've got to grow up quickly if you're going to make the grade. And fortunately, you're on the ground staff. I was 15 till I was 17. You're supposed to be on the ground staff.
Right.
But Don took me off the ground staff when I just turned 16. So if I was 16, I was training with the first team all the time. So that was a big help. And as I said, John joined in 63 and the team were very, very successful. I got a bad thigh injury, though, when I was 16, and it hindered me for the rest of my career, and it held me back a lot. I think I would have achieved more than I did if it wasn't for the thigh injury I had when I was 16. I had about 5 operations on it, and when I was about 23, 24, they told me I'd have to pack the game in. But fortunately, I got over it and learned how to play with it over the years, and played till I was 36, like a lot of the Leeds United players at that time, because we were brought up, to work hard, to train hard, to enjoy the game, to enjoy playing the game. And that was all down to Don. So that's how it all started. some great occasions as well.
That must have been an unbelievable experience, though, as a 14-year-old, to be thrown straight in there. That was around the time, I guess, Bobby Collins had joined.
It was when he pulled me out to train with the first team that day, because I'll never forget it. There was a lot of snow on the ground, and it was pretty icy. 1962 was a bad winter, and my first recollection of it is picking the ball up and nutmegging the late Jack Charlton, knocking it through his legs, and Jack booted me up in the air, and I was lying in the snow, and he looked down and says, "Don't do that to me again, you little." You can understand what Jack would say, So that was the first experience of it, but thoroughly enjoyable.
Is that where Don Revie came up with that line then, that if you were walking in snow, you wouldn't leave a footprint?
Well, I've tried it many times. It's not worked. I do leave footprints in snow.
What was it like then in the years after that, as you're starting to think about making your debut? Because John would talk about that period, and he would have felt he was a young player at sort of 22, 23 in that dressing room, and looking up to somebody of the likes of Bobby Collins, who he would always bring out as the player who changed the culture. As a teenager going into that dressing room, do you just sit there quietly and go about your business, or did you feel actually you were able to let your personality out?
I don't think you can actually think like that as a young player, or if you're any age. Because it's a tough game, football. There's so many players in the dressing room who want to be in the starting 11. So you got to have faith in your ability. Unfortunately enough, I had faith in my ability. I remember, I watched Bobby Collins when Bobby was a great Celtic player. My dad used to take me to Celtic Park, and Bobby was one of the heroes, and obviously Bobby went to Everton. I remember, many years later, when I was established player, talking to John, and I says to John, you played for Manchester United, you won the FA Cup. Why did you come to Leeds United in 1963 when they're in the old second division, And John looked at me and he says, one of the reasons I came, Eddie, was because I knew Bobby Collins was there. So that's how important Bobby Collins was to the club. I think there's been many great players at the club over the years, obviously. But I don't think there's ever been a more important player walk through the gates of Ellen Road than Bobby Collins. Because I think Don seen that Bobby was somebody that could teach the players how to play the game properly. Bobby was only 5'3", but as people know, Bobby was very physical. He was a great player, great technician, great passer of the ball, but a tremendous desire to win. Sometimes took it a little bit too far, like a few of the players in the early days, but that was the nature of the game then. So when you joined the club, you soon realised that you had to grow up quickly if you wanted to be a player at that level. And fortunately enough, it was, with the players that I was surrounded by and watching them and learning from them, you soon got to think to yourself, well, this is the way it's got to be. You've got to work hard. You've got to have confidence in your ability. Don always says to us as young players when we walk through the door, throughout your career, always think of the 3 C's. And his 3 C's were confidence in your ability, concentration level to play for 90 minutes, and the courage to use your ability when you go out and play. And that always stood the young players at Leeds in good stead.
It really does seem like they were wise words, because you talk about the height there of Bobby Collins, and you think then of the great Leeds central midfield of John Giles and Billy Bremner, tough as nails, but not the biggest men, but they had the courage of their convictions. And also as a winger, like a tricky player, that actually he let you express that.
That's the thing about football, I'd never played wing in my life till I came to Leeds. I'd never played as a left wing in my life.
Where'd you play?
I used to play the old number 6 halfback. I always wore the number 6 when I played with the Glasgow and the Scottish schoolboys. And when I made my debut for Leeds in the early games when I played, and I was fortunate to get in the team because Bobby got injured in Turin, and I made my debut when I was 17. And I played midfield. I played midfield that day. It was just that the reason I played outside left is that Don came to me one day and he says to me, Eddie, I'm looking at the makeup of the side to progress. Would you mind having a go outside left? You know, he says, I've got, you know, Bobby was still at the club, but Bobby was, you know, he had a bad injury, and it was Johnny and Billy were the mainstays in the midfield area. And he says, would you have a go outside left? I think you'll find it'll not be a problem for you because you're quick, you can get by people. So that's how I became an outside left. All my life, and Johnny knows this, I was a frustrated midfield player. I wanted to play where Giles had played. But, you know, I played outside left, and that's how people remember me. But in the early days, you know, as I said, I'd never near the touchline when I was a young player. Up till I was about 18 when Don asked me to play outside left.
Did you get kicked up and down the pitch?
Well, you expected it in those days. I mean, the game was a bit different to it is now, you know. And, I mean, years ago, like, the first challenge was usually always free for defenders, and they let you know about it. And the game was a bit more difficult then, you know. There's no challenging from behind now, and so you had to have your wits about you. And that's, you know, I look at Bobby and Billy and Johnny. I mean, Johnny, by his own admission, when he went to Manchester United, he had to grow up quickly with the physical side of the game. Because as well as, you know, being able to look after himself physically, you know, like a lot of the Leeds players, like Billy, you know, they were tremendous footballers, but they soon realised, and I think it all stemmed from the way Bobby played the game. If Bobby was playing the game, it was going to be a purely technical game, that would suit Bobby fine. But if it was going to be a real physically hard game, Bobby could match anybody. And I think Billy and Johnny took the mantle over from Bobby Collins. And I think John would tell you that. I mean, because he was a great role model, Bobby. As I said, at times he took it too far, but a lot of players did then. And that was just the nature of the game in the early 60s, you know, towards the late 60s, it changed a little bit. And we probably changed a little bit as well. And the club's approach to the game.
Talking about that midfield partnership then of Giles and Bremner, John said, I think it took 5 minutes for them to have a telepathic understanding that the second they were put together in the middle of midfield, it just clicked, that they both had a brilliant understanding of each other's games. Is that your memory of it? Yeah, because, see, the two of them were great players, but they were completely different in character and in how they approached the game. You know, the two of them had tremendous talent. I mean, the two of them for midfield scored 115 goals each for the club. But, you know, Billy was different for John in the sense that if we went a goal down or it was nothing each, Billy would forget his midfield duties. He'd be off. I'm going to get the equaliser. I'm going to get the winning goal. But the funny thing about Billy is 9 times out of 10 he did it. John was more astute. You know, he was the player that would dictate the pace of the game, how we played. In a way, Johnny was more like Bobby than Billy was. Although the two of them were physically strong and mentally strong in their approach to the game, and great technicians, great passers of the ball, they were different in how they approached it. I mean, John would probably be the first to see where we could hurt teams, you know. And Billy, and you look at Billy Bremner's record, I mean, Billy scoring goals in big games is just unbelievable. And that's why I think the two of them had this great understanding, because they understood the strengths and weaknesses of each other. And when I say weaknesses, there wasn't many weaknesses in the game at all, you know. The two of them were probably the complete midfield players. I mean, you looked at the way they played, their approach to the game, and John would tell you as well, you know, the two players you're talking about, Billy and John, they played with great players as well. You know, they played with a lot of great players, and they would understand that what they brought to the team helped the other players, and what the other players brought to their game helped them as well. So it was a great team effort, but the two players were outstanding. I mean, probably, I don't think there's been a better midfield partnership in my time in the game that I've seen anyway.
You know, but we'd some great partnerships. You know, the two centre backs, Charlton and Hunter.
Not bad.
I mean, yeah, but see, you know, like the two of them, they complemented each other as well. And you know, Norman had a reputation as being a hard man, but Norman Hunter was a great footballer. I mean, Norman started as a midfield player, you know, and Don put him to the back to play alongside Big Jack, and they two complemented each other. I mean, I think as a club player, I mean, I think Bobby Moore was a great international defender, but as a club player, I don't think I've seen anybody better than Norman, week in, week out. He was a tremendous player. And obviously, Paul Madeley was a great player with two full-backs, and Paul Reaney and Terry Cooper, Peter Lorimer, Mick Jones and Alan Clark.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at the lineup, it's not a bad lineup.
Yeah, and the great thing about having had John on the show is that that was an era of so many memorable teams, whether it was United with Best and Charlton, the Liverpool side that was emerging under Shankly, that great Celtic team. But I think Irish people probably know more about that Leeds side because of John than they do of any of those teams, and those names roll off the tongue, those names that you talk about. But the one man that actually we know little about from that time at Leeds is actually John Giles, because when he picks his all-time Leeds 11, he doesn't include himself. He'll talk about yourself, he'll talk about Billy Bremner. You might just give us what John Giles was like in 66, 67, 68, as both on the pitch and off the pitch.
Different people have different opinions about the game, you know. And, you know, when people say to me, who's the best player you played with? You know, and I'm splitting hairs. You know, I would come down in favour of John, you know. So John's been very modest when he says he wouldn't have been the best Leeds United 11. You know, I think all the players that I played with, I think that there's a good more than half the team would come down and in favour of John being the best player they played with. That's my opinion.
What was it about his game that made him so good?
Well, his knowledge of the game was tremendous. He had two great feet, a great passer of the ball, could score goals, could also get into great goal-scoring positions. I mean, when I played outside left and, you know, he would knock the ball to me, you know, but he would say to me before the game, don't forget, Eddie, I'm always just inside you and edge of that 18-yard box. You know, if you could buy somebody, you know, I'm always there. If somebody trying to cover the full-back, I'll always be available for you. Yeah, just his general knowledge of how to play the game and his tremendous ability. I mean, John could do it all. He could win the ball. He could pass the ball. He could buy people in tight areas. You know, Billy had great feet round the ball, terrific feet, but John had probably the better range of passing. You know, but that's no belittling Billy in any way, because I don't think I've seen many players that did a better range of passing with both feet than Johnny. I mean, the only other player, the player that I think is the best British player I've ever seen is Bobby Charlton. You know, and Johnny's no far off that mark to me.
Did he ever put in a bad tackle?
Well,
because he claims not to have.
Admission, John says there's a couple of things he'd done in his career that he looks back and he wasn't very proud of it, you know. But that was how the game was then. I mean, you know, I think that, you know, I look back in it and I remember watching the 1965 FA Cup final between Leeds and Liverpool, and the aforementioned Bobby Collins went into a tackle with Jerry Byrne, you know, and Bobby went in rather high. In fact, he went in that high, he broke Jerry Byrne's collarbone, you know. So that, you know, the game was a bit like that then. You used to have to look out for yourself. And John put in a few tackles that some people nowadays would look at and say that was a bad challenge. But most of the players that played in the midfield area then were like that. It was a bit like live by the sword, die by the sword. You know.
It was a team of huge character and of so many great stories, a lot of success, league titles, European success, but a large part of the story as well is that there were so many near misses. That group were so close together for 10 years, finishing runner-up in the league 5 times. So many close misses where the fixture list went against you. FA Cup final, like the 1970 FA Cup final, one of the greatest FA Cup finals. Even still, people talk about it 50 years on. The bond that was there between that group, the experience you endured together, it's clearly something that stuck with that group, even 50 years on.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, obviously, as you know, sadly, a few players have passed away in recent years. Billy left his, very early age, Billy Bremner. But the players that are still around, we've still got a great bond together. And we played together for 10, 12 seasons. We probably should have won more than we did. We were good enough to have won more. I know that. But circumstances, a lot of bad luck along the way. You can always make excuses in football. It's what happens on the day that counts. But we should have won more trophies than we did. But at that particular time, there were a lot of good sides around. So it was never going to be easy. We had great competition for down south. The Arsenal were a very strong team then. Manchester City in the late 60s, Manchester United. There was a lot of strong teams. Everton were a terrific team as well. So there was a lot of challenges in front of teams then. But in Liverpool, as you mentioned Liverpool, I mean, they were probably great rivals of ours in the early to late 60s. And, with some tremendous games against them. But, when you look at all the clubs for that era, they'd names, nearly every club then, they'd names that roll off the tongue. You mentioned our side, and people still talk about the players I played with great affection, and rightly so. And, people say to me, what's the greatest moment of your career? And, there was a lot of great moments, from a team point of view, an individual point of view. But the greatest thing for me, being at the club under Don, was sitting in a dressing room before every game and looking at the players that were sitting alongside and thinking to myself, there's no way we can get beat today. At times you were going to get beat, but it was a great feeling to have that. And that stuck with us all the way through for the years we played together. It was a tremendous feeling to have because you knew you were playing with great players.
Yeah, it is. It's a brilliant feeling, I'm sure. And as you say, something that stuck throughout your playing career, but even afterwards, because even in recent months, it's been such a tough time for that group with the passing of Norman Hunter, of Trevor Cherry, and of course of Big Jack as well, of Jack Charlton. It's John Giles was talking a lot over that time of that bond that you had, that being in that dressing room, looking each other in the eye and knowing you would do whatever it takes. That's something that never leaves.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think that's why we're still friends to this day. I mean, John was talking to me not that long ago saying, Eddie, we'll need to get together again as a group, and have a do, and, because we're all getting older. We met up, a few months ago before the lockdown when, all the players were, we get the freedom of the city as a group down side. And that was great to see everybody then. But, we'd probably fix something up as soon as we can to meet up together, the players that are remaining, because we always have great times together. We can always look back, and nostalgia is a great thing. And especially when you've played at the highest level. I mean, at one time we had about 14 players in our staff all together, all full international players. So, you were playing with a lot of good players, great players, and players that knew what to take, how to win games. I'll stand for Don in the early days, though. I mean, the manager's got to get great credit for that, the way he brought the players up. I think his foresight, and when he first took the job over, he realised he hadn't a lot of money to spent relatively little on bringing Bobby Collins to the club, bringing Johnny to the club, and he concentrated then on trying to bring the best schoolboy players he could to Ellen Road. and a lot of us grew up together if we were aged 15, 16. I mean, we talk about Billy. Billy joined the club when he was a 15-year-old. Billy was a bit older than me, obviously. But Billy played for the Scottish schoolboys and come down before Don's time.
Yeah.
And Billy was a Scottish schoolboy international player. So the club had, a great reputation for getting a lot of good young players. I mean, my brother Frank was 7 years younger than me. I wanted Frank to join Glasgow Celtic, when he was going to become a player. He was a ball boy at Celtic Park, and my dad was still living then, and he wanted to see Frank playing with the Celtic. But John Barr, the scout that took me down, invited Frank down for a weekend, and Frank joined the club. And not through any pushing for me. He just made his own mind up. I think it must have stemmed back to the day I made my debut for the club against Sheffield Wednesday on New Year's Day, 1966, because Don never told me that I was playing till the morning of the game. So my mum and dad couldn't be there. But it just so happened it was school holidays, and Frank was down staying with me as a young lad in my digs, and he was the only member in my family that was at the game. So he seen my debut. I was lucky enough to score my debut against Sheffield. We beat them 3-0 in Ellen Road.
Great.
So I think that stuck in Frank's mind as well. And obviously after I came, I came down with my best friend, Jimmy Lumsden from Glasgow. Jimmy and I played with the Glasgow schoolboys together. We're still friends to this day. I mean, Jimmy moved on. And Jimmy ended up coaching at Celtic Park, under Big Billy McNeil, and coached assistant manager to Davy Moyes with Everton and Manchester United. So the two of us, when we left Glasgow when we were 15, we grew up in the same area, with a long time in the game. And after I came to the club, obviously Joe Jordan came, Gordon McQueen. Players went on to make great names for themselves, but starting at Leeds United as young players. And it happened for a lot of young players that came to the club under Don.
Obviously a huge sadness in this country last month when the news came through of Jack Charlton's passing. Himself and John Giles had maybe differing views on football, it seems. Did you ever find yourself in the middle of a Jack Charlton, John Giles footballing row?
Regular. Nearly every week. Especially on the pitch.
Oh, yeah?
See, John always believed that he had been the man that people should be looking for when they got the ball. Because John was very clever at making himself space, and Jack would always tell me, get out the way. I can do what you can do, But Big Jack was a great centre half, and for a period of time, obviously we won the World Cup. For a period of time, I don't think there was a better centre half in the world than Jack Charlton. And you look what he did for the Republic, as a manager, the great esteem he's held in Ireland and in Leeds, obviously. Because Jack joined Leeds in the early 50s, people forget that. Jack was a lot older than us. Well, definitely a lot older than I was, Jack was about 10, 12 years older than me. So, to grow up and play with somebody like that, and you look at, that centre-back partnership with Charlton and Hunter, there wasn't a better one. You look at the midfield players, Bremner and Giles, there wasn't any better than that. And right down the middle of the park, our club were very strong. But, it would be like, everybody understood how each other played. I mean, if John went forward and got beyond me or got beyond the front two, Alan Clark and Mick Jones, what happened at times, he knew I would always tuck back in the middle of the park because it was just natural for me as well to do that. And at times I would be allowed to wander, and if Johnny drifted out wide, I would move into the midfield area. We just had a great understanding as a unit, and none more so than the two midfield players, Billy and Johnny Giles.
Eddie, stick with us. We just need to take a quick break, but I'd love to talk to you about the more modern times of Leeds United and the return to the Premier League. But we'll just take a quick break for a moment. You're welcome back to the Football Show. Still joined on the line by the Leeds United legend Eddie Gray. Eddie, John recently picked his all-time Leeds 11. You could probably pick it yourself. Nigel Martin gets in, the only modern-day player to get in. Poor old Gary Sprake gets an awful hard time here. Doesn't make it. So Nigel Martin is the goalkeeper. The back four, Paul Reaney, Jack Charlton, Norman Hunter and Paul Madeley. Then you got Peter Lorimer, Billy Bremner, Bobby Collins, Alan Clark, Mick Jones, and finally Eddie Gray. And here is why John said he included you in his all-time Leeds 11.
Eddie was originally a midfield player, left-footed lad, great control. And because Billy Bremner and I were playing in midfield, Tom played him on the left wing. And he was a brilliant dribbler. Like Leeds used to call him the Leeds George Best. Okay. He had a lot of injuries, Nathan, actually, in his time with us. He had a lot of serious injuries, but came back from, again, a terrific lad, Eddie, with great control. He could go past people. You only had to get the ball out to Eddie, and he was on his way. But like they used to say in those days, wingers are brainless wingers. Eddie was anything but. He was a very, very intelligent player who was playing on the left wing, Nathan. Great control, and could go past people and make goals, score goals, and a great attitude to it as well. Great attitude. Don
Revie said of Eddie Gray, if he played on snow, he wouldn't leave footprints.
Well, that's true. He was quite a big lad, Eddie, but deceptively quick, but great control of the ball, and could go past people. Like nowadays, you don't get many wingers, Nathan, and if you do, there's not many going past people, you know. Whereas if you were playing like good play, usually goes out to the wingers, and you get it out to Eddie, and he'd do his stuff. He'd take the full back on straight away. He was complete opposite to Peter. You know, Peter scored 270 goals from Leeds from the right side, sort of winger, right side midfield, but right side, and he was a natural striker, Peter, but he played on the right wing because that's the only way he could get in the team, and he scored. But Peter could score as many goals and maybe more. He scored more than Eddie, and sometimes would make more because he didn't have to beat somebody, Nathan. He would come up the left back and he'd get a cross in. He was a beautiful crosser of the ball, kick of the ball in his right foot. So he didn't actually have to beat anybody to get good crosses in for Mick Jones and Alan Clark in those days.
Both Eddie Gray and Peter Lorimer were scorer of great goals as well. I was watching some goals from Eddie Gray earlier today. One he scored against Burnley, where he must have dinked in and out about 6 times before smashing a shot past the keeper.
Somebody said he beat half the people at the game. It was a fantastic goal, wasn't it, Nathan? You know, he just beat them, and they had somebody on the ground. He was brilliant. Peter was the opposite. Peter he'd only make half a yard on the left back, and he whizzed them in with his right foot. He was a great kicker of the ball in his right foot. Scored important goals.
The Leeds George Best is with us right now. That's not a bad compliment, Eddie.
Well, you don't know about that. But it's funny there, you know, talking, you know, I spoke to you earlier about Johnny being a great passer of the ball, you know, and it was fascinating to listen to John there because Peter's obviously my great mate as well. I've never seen a better striker of the ball than Peter Lorimer. And like Johnny, I'm not just talking about striking the ball at goal, obviously, the fierce shot, a tremendous shot, but Peter was a tremendous kicker of the ball. I remember playing for the ex-players, you know, when Peter and I were 50. And the hardest thing to do as you go older is to kick the ball. Well, Peter could still ping the ball right across the park. No effort. I think John would admit Peter was actually even a cleaner striker of the ball than Johnny was. I've never seen a cleaner striker of the ball, you know. And as John was right there. Peter just needed half a yard, no back lift, fire balls across the face of the goal to the back post, just make a half a yard for himself and bang, back of the net for 20, 30 yards. Yeah, tremendous player, Peter. It's funny, Johnny mentioning Peter, you know, the year before I played for the Scottish schoolboys, I went to Ibrox to watch the Scottish schoolboys playing against England, and Peter was a year older than me, and Peter was playing for the Scottish schoolboys, and I was only 14 at the time, and I watched the game, and I felt sorry for the English goalkeeper that night, because even at that age, Peter was pinging the ball at the goal. I think he scored 2 that night for 30, 40 yards. I mean, and I always thought to myself, when I looked at the programme and I seen this name, Peter Lorimer, Broughty Ferry, Dundee, you know, and normally all the Scottish schoolboys come from either the Glasgow or the Edinburgh area. But Peter was exceptional. And it was a great pleasure to play with him and still speak to Peter regularly. He's not been too well, Peter, the last few years, but he's okay. And I still speak to him every week.
Yeah, it's brilliant that you've all stayed so close, particularly in the last few months, which has been, I'm sure, a very tough time for all of you. We could spend hours talking about that Leeds team, and we'd love to talk to you again about it. We might get yourself and John on air together some night and do a bit of reminiscing and go back and do a bit of nostalgia. But like your time at Leeds includes management when you finished up playing, and you went back to the club then as well with David O'Leary. And like that time, it's funny, you talk about the schoolboy culture of the club when you were a player coming through. When you went back, and the young players that were there at the time, and again the Irish connection, so many Irish players there when you had Gary Kelly and Ian Hart and the young players coming through. Like, I remember when I was 15, 16, it seemed like every good young player in Ireland was ending up at Leeds, and you had Alan Mabry and Stephen McPhail. And I was talking to Alan Cawley earlier on, who was one of those players as well, and he was absolutely raving about working under you and as a coach on the pitch, just the interest you took in all the players, but it seemed particularly in the Irish players he felt.
Well, I mean, we had some tremendous players, coming to, south of the border, they were really good, Wes Boyle for the north, he was a good player as well. But, it's funny, like Harry Kewell, who came from Australia, we used to say to Harry, like, who was the best player you played with? He would always say to you, Stephen McPhail.
Wow.
I mean, Stephen was tremendously gifted, If Stephen would have had another half yard of pace, Stephen would have been like Liam Brady, he had that much talent, great control of the ball, great vision as well. We had some tremendous young players at the club, though, with the Irish boys and Alan Mabry. It's funny enough, all the players that had come through for the Republic, when they were really young, 15, 16, you would have backed Alan Mabry to be the most successful. And it was probably him and Harry Kewell were the youngest players to play, in that time when David and George were at the club, George Graham and David O'Leary. But Alan he just lost it a little bit, but he made a great career for himself. But he was a player that was the captain of the Youth Cup winning team. He was reliable and solid, and he had the disappointing game one day at Ellen Road, Alan, playing for the first team. And I think it affected him, for a long time. But he ended up, he had a great career up in Scotland. Yeah. And top player, But all the players I worked with, there was none, the young players at that particular time, the Kewells, Jonathan Woodgates, other players through Alan Mabry. Damien Lynch played as well.
Yeah.
There was none more gifted than Stephen McPhail. Stephen had a great gift to play the game.
Yeah, and he's still very much involved in the game over here.
Yes, I know
involved
that.
With Shamrock Rovers, and obviously.
Yeah, I know. I still keep in touch with Stephen. It was a great time for the club for producing young players, and obviously, you probably know the story about the club spending too much money, and we had a lot of terrific players that went on to do terrific things in the game. I mean, Jonathan Woodgate, ended up at Real Madrid. I mean, Jonathan played centre back for England when he was 19. There's not many players do that. He was a tremendous player. We'd signed Rio Ferdinand, and we had to sell Rio Ferdinand through circumstances, financial circumstances. So as well as being good times, it was the start of the downfall of the club. And funny enough, I think we're going to talk about the present times, and it's been 16 years since we've been in the Premier League, or the big league. And I was caretaker manager myself when we got relegated. And
yeah, funnily enough, it was on Premier League years last week, and I think it was the game against Charlton and a 3-3 draw, and there's just this bang on the side of the dugout that you gave when the full-time whistle goes, and considering all you'd given to the club through the years, it must have been a pretty heartbreaking moment.
Yeah, but I regret going back as caretaker in a way. I only done it because of a chap called Trevor Burks. Trevor's involved with Swansea now, and he was trying to look after the club at that particular time, the financial situation, and he asked me to get back as caretaker. And when I was back for about this, because the club were selling players. But even allowing that, I was still disappointed in myself that I couldn't get the club out of trouble, and it was it was the hardest day in my whole career when we went down. I'd played under Alan Clark when the club got relegated, in the 1982 season when I became manager the first time, but then when I was caretaker and we went down, that's about the hardest time I've had at the football club. Going back to the time, when I was manager in 1982, we also had another Republic player that played with the Republic then, and he played for the team for me in the 80s, and John Sheridan. John was a smashing footballer as well, and he played with Republic Ireland. But, after David left the football club, slowly but surely, all the top players left, and that was when the decline of the club set in. And it's great to see them back in the Premier League now. I mean, I'm just so delighted, still around to see it, and thoroughly deserved last season. I mean, all credit to the manager, the head coach, whatever you want to call Marcelo Bielsa. He's different.
Have you spoken to him? I know he certainly doesn't like to speak English publicly. Have you had much interaction with him? No. I mean, I've said hello to him a few occasions. I've bumped into him in Wetherby. I've said hello to him at games. I think he can understand and to speak more English than he lets on, though. Right. I would think so. But he's a one-off. I mean, all credit to the owner and, the chief exec for actually going to Argentina and persuading somebody like Marcelo Bielsa to come. I mean, when he first came, people were wondering what we're going to get. His reputation in South America, El Loco, that was his nickname. How many managers you see come out and sitting on a bucket, and he wears a tracksuit everywhere he goes. But what he's brought and what he's done for the football club in 2 seasons has been amazing. And in his first season, we probably should have been up, very disappointing. We looked as if we were nailed on to get up, in the first 2, into the playoffs. Looks as if we're going to win the playoffs, and we never. So for the club to persuade him to come in the first place and then persuade him to stay after the disappointment in the first season and get the club back to the Premier League and dining at the top table again with all the top teams in the country was tremendous for the city, for the football club, and the present players. Yeah. I mean, I've watched some of the present players now for 4 or 5 seasons, and I've got to admit, maybe 4 seasons ago, I would be thinking to myself, and no disrespect to the players, I'd be thinking to myself, I don't know if these players are good enough to get us out of the Championship. But the improvement they've made as individuals and as a unit, and everybody knows you play to the best of your individual ability for the benefit of the side. And the improvement they've made as individuals and as a unit has just been tremendous, beyond all recognition. I mean, last season was just another season when they played tremendous football. Yeah. The atmosphere at Elland Road was sensational. And the players deserve all the plaudits they get. But, I mean, I think Marcelo Bielsa has bought into the city of Leeds and the passion the city and the fans have for the football club. Only one club in the city, as everybody knows. And there's great feeling for the club. And the fans have bought into Marcelo Bielsa, and the players have. And, I look back when I first started, and, there's a certain similarity, not in character, but how they run things, the great managers. Go back to Sir Matt Busby, Bill Shankly, Don Revie, Alex Ferguson, players, people like that. They run the football clubs, and you do it their way or no way at all. If you don't do it the way they want it, they show you the door. And I think Marcelo Bielsa's like that, I think he has everybody in the football club
on their toes. And I mean everybody. You know, they're always thinking, what is he going to do next? What is he going to say? I mean, the players work under him. It's a hard regime. I spoke to a few of the players. He can have them back 3 times a day. He could have them back in the evening. They can be in Sunday morning training. But everything he does in training, it's not for training's sake. It's all geared up to winning matches. And they proved that last season with the style of football they played. And I don't think Marcelo Bielsa, even though we're getting into the Premier League and obviously you're playing against some of the best players in the world, some of the best teams in the world, I don't think he'll change his philosophy and how he wants your team to play. I think we'll still try to play a possession game. We'll try and make it difficult for sides when they're on the ball. We'll close them down quickly. The physical level that we play at, I think I'll surprise a few teams in the Premier League because you go non-stop for 90 plus minutes, wherever it is. You know, even if 85 minutes we've not scored the goal, you've always got that feeling in the back of their mind, yep, they're going to pop up with one. And when you have to actually look, after the lockdown, we were by far the fittest team in the league, the team with the most belief, and allied to the ability that was in the club. I mean, we ended up winning the league by 10 points, where it was quite tight at one time. And I think that was all down to the belief, the fitness, even after a layoff, you know, players not being able to train together. They come back fit and strong and looking forward to playing games. And at the end of the season, you know, the last few games of the season, I mean, they played as well as they'd done at the start of the season. And you know, I think they were tremendous. And I'm looking forward to seeing them competing against the teams in the Premier League. Yeah. I mean, this week's going to be tough. You're playing against the champions. But the funny thing about it is, I mean, you know, like, where's Leeds United getting back into the Premier League and the club, the stature of the club? When the fixture list come out, that's the one fixture that everybody was talking about.
Yeah, and it's your toughest game of the season out of the way, day one.
That's it. You know, everybody's talking about Leeds v Liverpool. And, you know, they weren't really looking at their other fixtures at the time. I mean, you know, the papers and the television, the radio stations, Leeds United v Liverpool. And I think it's, you know, even in the papers here this week, there's big articles about Bielsa and Leeds and Liverpool, the traditionally two clubs. John had an article in the paper the other week talking about the history. And, you know, it's fired the imagination, Leeds United back in the Premier League. The biggest disappointment for me and for the people and supporters of Leeds that unfortunately will not be able to see the game and go to Anfield. I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. If the crowd could have went to Anfield and we had an allocation of 25,000 tickets, we would have sold them all.
Yeah, I've no doubt.
It'd be the same way every Premier League we play this season. If and when the supporters can get back, we'll sell out our application without any trouble. There'll be no tickets that are sent to Leeds United getting back to the home side. You know, we'll sell our full allocation, regardless of where we're in the league. That's a disappointment. They'll not be there at the beginning. But I'm just looking forward to a full Ellen Road. You know, they'll probably have to make the stadium bigger. Obviously, there'll be plans for that. But a full Ellen Road, singing, marching on together, playing against the top sides in the Premier League and hopefully holding our own.
Yeah, I think everyone's fascinated to see how Bielsa and Leeds get on back in the Premier League. Eddie, we've heard a lot about you down through the years. You've more than lived up to it. It's been brilliant to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on the Football Show.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot, Eddie.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power. More confident than United before a Europa League final. Gamble responsibly. See dunlewy.net.